Okay, we'll start with this. You may have heard earlier today that Matchroom has added 4 new shows to the schedule, some of which we've already been talking about. Muratalla versus Cruz in late January, Murtazalia versus Kelly about a week later, Wood versus Warrington, the rematch, and the long-anticipated Navarrete versus Nuñez fight in late February, bringing the grand total of shows Matchroom intends to do within a 3-month span to about 8. About 8 shows from now until late February. Don't forget about the Monte Carlo show they're doing in early December next month. And there are 2 more in the middle. The Diego Pacheco versus Kevin Lele Saggio fight, December 13th. The Vizioli versus Howarth fight, set to go down later on the 17th. Small local show. The African Showcase show on the continent of Africa, more specifically in Accra, Ghana, headlined by Craig Spider Richards versus Dan Aziz on the 20th. Don't forget about the Australia show. Opataya's mandatory title defense against his mandatory challenger, Hussein Sin Cara, also in December. So it's really more like 9 shows. Just about. It's about 9 shows from now until late February, with the 4 recently announced ones. I believe this is Matchroom's attempt to provide value for money to existing DAZN subscribers, that not everything on the platform is going to cost you extra, that you don't always have to pay per view to see a good fight. The month of January is going to be a particularly busy month when you consider that this isn't all that's going on that month. Amanda Serrano will be returning to action early in January, also on DAZN. Subriel Matias will be defending his WBC title against Dalton Smith in the middle, and Xander Zayas and Abbas Baru will be unifying titles at the end. Don't forget about what's supposed to be Shakur Stevenson versus Teofimo Lopez, which is also rumored to be happening that same month. January is going to be a very, very busy month at the start of the next calendar year, though focusing on the Matchroom shows. It's about 9. And it's about time that they beefed up that schedule. I guess that Eddie Hearn got the memo, as it was just the other day. I was talking about how we've all been enjoying Turkey LL Sheik's Big Ring Magazine and Riyadh Season cards, but they've had an unfortunate side effect. When you decorate a card with that many headliners, fighters that normally headline their own shows, it leaves the rest of the schedule kind of bare and kind of thin, because you're using so many guys that would have had shows built around them with undercards and undercard fighters. You know, the month of August was a pretty dry month. The month of September, October arguably, things are now starting to pick up, and pick up fast, which is what a lot of DAZN subscribers wanted without the added cost of having to purchase pay-per-views, the announcement of their ultimate tier package. I saw a lot of people ask, what are you getting for your money as a DAZN subscriber if Turkey's putting all of his shows behind a paywall? This would be the answer to that question, that you don't need to subscribe to DAZN's ultimate tier, and you don't need to pay anything extra to get world-class boxing via Matchroom, as they have fully loaded the schedule from December into January, going into February. They've got shows all over, and as stated, for a boxing fan, this isn't even the whole schedule. This is just what Matchroom is doing. You know that you forgot one. What's supposed to be Ben Whitaker's Matchroom debut at the very end of this month, so it's really more like 10. Matchroom has rolled out a schedule of 10 separate cards from now
until late February. And I would call that value for money, that you don't need to sign up to the ultimate tier to get boxing.
I think the crown jewel of the schedule has to be the unification match between Emmanuel Navarrete and Sugar Nuñez, two world champions coming together to bring unifications to a division that sorely needs them. And this required the collaboration of both Matchroom and Top Rank to make it possible. Top Rank that are still between broadcasters right now. So since they can't keep Emmanuel busy themselves, they've rented him out to Matchroom. Genuinely intriguing fight because Emmanuel Navarrete, in spite of being so much more experienced than Sugar Nuñez across many more weight classes, as of late, he's put forward some uninspiring performances like what we saw at 135 with a then unbeaten Denis Berinchyk.
He looked fat and flabby and fleshy, not motivated against Denis Berinchyk at 135. More recently, at 130, where he's still WBO champion, he labored with an unheralded Charlie Suarez.
If that's what you had to go through with Charlie, what are you going to have to go through with Sugar?
It's not cut and dry. Sugar Nuñez didn't look good in his last fight against Pitufo Diaz, a common opponent between him and Emmanuel. There is a legitimate argument that Emmanuel handled that same fighter better than Sugar did.
Triangle theories don't work!
Well, it's a little bit more than just a triangle theory. You often hear it said that styles make fights. Both Emmanuel and Eduardo have the same style. They're both pressure fighters. There are nuances, there are differences, but they're both pressure fighters. So what is it about Emmanuel's pressure that worked better against Pitufo than Sugar's pressure? Why did Sugar labor with that same fighter if they both have the same base style? Is it because Emmanuel is better with that style?
It could be that, or it could be that Emmanuel looked better with Pitufo because that was a couple of years ago. That wasn't a recent fight. In Emmanuel's recent fights, he's looked fat and flabby and uninspired.
Questions that need answers.
Is Sugar Nuñez catching Emmanuel at the right time, or is Emmanuel going to be a lot more motivated for this fight, a lot more up for it, because this ain't a run-of-the-mill title defense. This is a unification match. By my count, the first unification match that Emmanuel will have had as a champion at any weight. Will that give him the kick in the ass he needs? Extra motivation to show up and show out, that he's facing another Mexican champion like himself.
Questions that need answers. I don't know what they are, and that's what makes this fight intriguing. That's what makes it the crown jewel of the Matchroom schedule. Thinking about this in a promotional lens, a promotional rivalry between Matchroom and Top Rank has yielded mixed results.
Years ago, when Jose Ramirez was still a champion and he crossed over from Top Rank over to Matchroom, he beat their champion, Mighty Mo Hooker.
Top Rank won that one.
Now, some years later, Raymond Ford crossed over from Matchroom over to Top Rank to take on Kolmatov, and he beat Kolmatov.
Matchroom won that one.
Better Beef beat Dmitry Bivol in their initial meeting, but then Dmitry won the rematch. So here, with Sugar and Emmanuel, we have yet another Matchroom versus Top Rank kind of situation, and the outcome is not cut and dry. It's not like what you see between Top Rank and the PBC. Usually, Top Rank beats their guys. Usually. Whereas here,
Top Rank fighters usually beat up PBC fighters, but with Matchroom, it's a mixed bag. It's not cut and dry.
The winner of the fight, whoever it is, must then answer to Charlie Suarez, who agreed to step aside and stand down to allow this unification match to happen. And I'm glad that he did, because this division sorely needs it. The super featherweight division has stood divided for a long, long time now, and it needs some finality. When you think about what Navarrete did in the bantamweight division and what Usyk did in the cruiserweight division, that's what served as the launch pad for those fighters. That's what got them a lot of attention. And then Inoue did it again at super bantam, and Usyk did it again at heavy. But but by then people knew them. By then people had heard of them. That's what could happen here for the winner of this fight at Super Feather. Whoever rules this division, and this is where it starts.
Emmanuel Navarrete currently comes in at number 9 on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list for having been a champion at 3 weights.
If he beats Sugar Nuñez, he will gain some ground. If he loses, he's off the list, and Sugar comes in likely at number 10.
In the most danger of being bumped off.
So it's a fascinating fight and a fascinating situation between two rough and rugged and gritty pressure fighters. You don't often see that stylistic matchup. Usually what you get is pressure fighter versus boxer puncher, pressure fighter versus pure boxer, but you seldom get pressure fighter versus pressure fighter.
It's going to be a great fight. Looking forward to it. And we'll talk more about it as the fight date approaches.
What he did was great, but I think a lot of it is down to, I think Canelo, man. I don't know. I think you can't really put like a peak Roy Jones in with people making a point of would he have beat Roy Jones? Come on, man. It's like, no. I think he done great going that way. He's a great fighter, Crawford, but I don't know. On one fight against the Canelo, I didn't think really turned up that night. I know you can make a point, I suppose, because you just beat Canelo, but I just don't think Canelo's the fighter he was, is he? Judging on that.
That is Joe's opinion, and he is entitled to it, as you are entitled to yours, and I am entitled to mine. That's what Joe thinks. Though, if you want to know what I think, and you're here, so I'll assume that you do, the biggest problem with Slappy Joe taking a stance like that when it comes to Crawford's win over Canelo, making the argument that Canelo is not what he was.
Are you saying that Terence faced a diminished version of that fighter, and that's what the victory came down to? That Canelo's not what he was? Because I could say the same thing about the Roy Jones Jr. that you fought. I could say the same thing about the Bernard Hopkins that you fought. Need I remind you that the both of those fighters were older when Joe fought them than Canelo when Crawford fought him?
The Roy Jones Jr. that Joe Calzaghe fought was 39 years old with 4 losses in the column. Bernard Hopkins was even older at 43, also with 4 losses in the column. Canelo, comparatively, was in his mid-30s.
Noticeably younger than the both of them, with less losses in the column, so that if you are now mitigating how much credit you want to give Terence, we could do the exact same thing with you, and what are your biggest victories on your resume, because on Joe Calzaghe's resume, those are the biggest and best names. 39-year-old Roy Jones Jr. and 43-year-old Bernard Hopkins.
If what you're telling me is that Terence fought a diminished Canelo, you fought a diminished Roy Jones Jr., and everybody knows it. You fought a diminished Bernard Hopkins. So careful that you're not projecting your own worries or your own inadequacies onto another fighter, because the difference between what you did to those fighters and what Terence did with Canelo is that Terence was the older one. Terence was the smaller fighter and the older fighter moving up in weight for what was the undisputed champion at the time.
And that ain't what you did when you fought Roy and when you fought Bernard. You were younger than them. You had that advantage.
After Joe's less than flattering comments about Terence Crawford, but Canelo specifically, the good people at Boxing Scene asked, who would have won at super middleweight, Canelo Alvarez or Joe Calzaghe? In their prime, in a time machine, who comes out on top?
Oh, I think Canelo would have came out on top.
That is not offset by Joe Calzaghe's unbeaten record, because Joe Calzaghe never fought a Floyd Mayweather. He never fought a Terence Crawford, someone of that ilk, of that caliber. The best caliber of fighters that he fought were guys in their late 30s or early 40s, and I think that matters. Yes, Roy is one of the greats, but he wasn't great when Joe fought him, and neither was Bernard.
Talk about Canelo.
Why do I think Canelo Alvarez would beat Joe Calzaghe in a time machine, even though Joe's never been beat? It's because Canelo's never been beat, not by no British fighter.
Canelo's got a spotless record against the Brits, whether you're talking about Matthew Hatton, Liam Smith, or Callum Smith, Billy Joe Saunders,
Amir King Khan, or Rocky Fielding. Canelo Alvarez has a spotless record against British fighters. Now, Joe Calzaghe would have been the natural super middleweight in this situation. Naturally taller and longer than Canelo Alvarez. I believe that Slappy Joe stood in at about 6 feet tall.
That wouldn't have helped.
At 168, I don't think that would have mattered one bit, because everybody that Canelo fought at that weight was about that same height. Whether you're talking about Caleb Plant, Callum Smith, Billy Joe, Rocky Fielding, they were all taller than Canelo.
William Skull.
Edgar Berlanga, Jaime Munguia, they were all taller than Canelo Alvarez. Their height and their length was not a problem. He was able to deal, and I think he would deal with Joe Calzaghe, who at his very best was a mid-range to inside combination puncher. That's where he got the name, Joe Slappy.
Used to string together rapid-fire combinations and sort of slapped with his punches. Very busy in a round, but at his best, that's what he was. And that's the kind of guy that Canelo can pick apart.
A big part of the reason some of these guys have been able to go the distance with Canelo is because they don't sit there with him. They don't punch with him like Joe would. Joe at his very best was a combination puncher, whereas a lot of these guys, they gotta get on ice skates to survive Canelo. They gotta move around, even though they're taller, even though they're longer. A lot of them just run.
Prime for prime, I've got Canelo. So give me the Canelo that fought Caleb Plant or fought Billy Joe Saunders. Give me that Canelo, and give me the Joe Calzaghe that fought Jeff Lacey.
Back in March of 2006, when Joe was about 33 years old, and I think Canelo beats that Joe Calzaghe. Yes, he does.
Joe at his best is a good mid-range to inside fighter, but a lot of these guys that have survived Canelo haven't fought him on the inside. They survived by staying on the outside.
Now, Joe did have hand speed, but Canelo has counters. And if you try to string together punches on Canelo, well, that's a mistake. Remember that we're talking about a prime Canelo Alvarez. This is a fantasy fight, so it's prime for prime. And against a prime Canelo, you're not going to get away with stringing together 3 and 4 punch combinations, because he's going to catch you in between. He's going to counter you in between. And Joe being the taller, longer fighter with the longer torso.
Body shots, anyone?
Listen, when you're going to rate fighters in an all-time great list, you don't really rate them based on who you think would win in a time machine. The only way to rate them on that premise is by what they accomplished, what they did. But if the question is who would have won...
I also rate Canelo well above Joe Calzaghe on an all-time great list and on an all-time great super middleweight list. But as far as who I think would have won, I think Canelo would win.
It's the funniest thing with these guys. You have a lot of people that don't want to give Canelo credit for beating a 36-year-old Sergey Kovalev. But the Sergey Kovalev he fought was younger than the 39-year-old Roy Jones Jr. that Joe fought, than the 43-year-old Bernard Hopkins that Joe fought. So if you don't give Canelo credit for the version of Sergey that he fought, then you can't give Joe credit for the Hopkins that he fought or the Jones Jr. that he fought. And those are the best names on his entire resume. Bottom line, not only do I rate Canelo above Joe Calzaghe as a super middleweight, since Canelo became undisputed, and Joe never did that, in a time machine, in a fantasy fight, I also favor Canelo to beat him, because you're going to try to string together combinations, and he's going to catch you in between.
But did people forget that Canelo is a great counterpuncher, if you give him the chance to counter?
Unbeaten against Brits.